Good morning, everybody. This is Christopher Constant, Chair of the committee, and we are about to begin the process. I'm not sure who's on the line yet. Desiree, you can see it. Do we have the members necessary to conduct a meeting?
I've got Jason, Cheryl Beckham, Dean, Ron, a number of assembly members.
Number of assembly members being?
Felix, Jamie, Suzanne, you, Meg, Austin,
Okay.
Crystal.
Why don't we take the roll and get started? That's perfect.
All right, one sec. I'm still gonna put some other people in here. Okay, I will start with the roll. Miss Allard?
Here.
Okay. Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar? Miss Kennedy?
Here.
Miss LaFrance? Miss LaFrance, are you here? Mr. Perez-Verdia? Mr. Peterson? Miss Quinn Davidson?
Here.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton? Miss Salatel?
Here.
Okay, let me try. Mr. Dunbar, are you here? Miss LaFrance? Mr. Perez-Verdia? Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Okay. Mr. Weddleton? Okay. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 assembly members present.
So why don't we go ahead and have folks who else is here say hello.
Starting from the administration, I guess we'll move to our participants. This is Bill Policy, the Anchorage Municipal Manager. Maybe we'll go to the port folks next.
Yes, Steve Buffo, Port Director.
Cheryl, Port Modernization Program.
Jason Bockenstead, Chief of Staff for the Mayor.
Jim Jager from the Port.
Alex Slifka, Chief Fiscal Officer.
Ron Hatton, Purchasing Director, Muni.
Bob Owens with the Department of Law.
Anna Henderson, MLNP General Manager.
And I think that is all of the administration side attendees.
Right. Who do we have visiting us from the port operators?
We have Dylan Faber with Matson.
Anyone from Tote?
And Val Dreyfus is trying to get in the meeting right now too, so he'll be joining us momentarily if he's not already on.
All right.
Eugene Haberman, member of the public.
Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody. We'll get started. On the agenda, we have a few items. This is the May 21st, 2020 Assembly Enterprise Utility Oversight Committee of the Whole. And we're meeting to discuss an update of the Port of Alaska, another business. And the first item that I would like to do is pivot to an off-topic conversation. I see that Mr. Dunbar and Ms. LaFrance have joined us in the chat. So they're on the phone now too, or on the call. I am very excited for a report from Mr. Bob Owens. If we can, Mr. Falls, if you don't mind, run it first.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I think just to give some structure to where we intended to go for the chair's review, is we think there are 4 things to discuss today on the port side. The first is breaking news out of the MARAD lawsuit. The second is a quick update on how the petroleum cement terminal construction is proceeding. The third is the plan of finance that we circulated last night. And the last is the steering committee ordinance, a new draft of which was circulated last night as well. But yeah, I agree. Let's start with the breaking news and have Mr. Owens tell us about the order we received this morning or late last night.
Okay, thank you. At first, bright and early this morning, 6:30, we received an order from the Court of Federal Claims addressing the motion to dismiss the Myriad lawsuit that had been filed by the government. Oh, wow, you've got it right there. The long and the short of it is that the court was not impressed with the government's position. It denied everything that they argued and denied the motion to dismiss. And we have scheduled a hearing to set a trial date for June 3rd. The issues have been narrowed to some extent, but we still are planning to go forward as if everything was on the table. But this sweeps so much off the table that the government has been using to deflect and divert that we're feeling like we've accomplished a great deal with this decision.
For general visibility, I think remember where we were. The federal government's position had and maybe still would remain that we are entitled to $0 in this lawsuit. The motion was filed by the government to prevail on the theory that they were entitled to $0. The court hasn't ruled on whether we are entitled to particular amounts of money, but has resolved this threshold question, which would have resulted in no recovery to the municipality. And so I've highlighted here just the punchline on the introductory portion of the order. I haven't even read on the full order yet, but the court's finding there was consideration for the agreements, and so our agreements were valid binding contracts. The motion for summary judgment is denied, and what happens now is we're going to proceed towards a trial. But it also may position us to a place where we're able to have better conversations with the government about potentially coming to a reasonable settlement. Bob, do you want to say anything about the timeline that we may be on if we are unable to resolve it out of by some sort of mutual settlement?
We don't know currently what the court schedule is. We are working with a judge who is semi-retired, so he doesn't have as big of a caseload and probably has more flexibility in scheduling the trial. We're hoping that it could be set for this fall. That's what we're going to be pushing for. And we anticipate that in the course of the scheduling conference, the court will provide a window for mediation or other alternative dispute resolution processes. And so that will be something that is explored before the trial. And we're hoping to get the trial date set this year and make it rigid and inflexible and something we will proceed with no matter what unless we settle it.
And so this is a public document. We sent it to a number of people by email this morning. If the committee is interested in posting it, there's no problem with doing that. And otherwise, we're happy to answer any questions on the lawsuit side.
I don't see any questions at this time. I would note for the record that Mr. Weddleton has arrived and said he's here. My hope would be that we prepare a communication to our delegation in Washington. I'm not sure that they're made aware this is such breaking news, but it would be great to bring them into the loop that we have made it past this next hurdle. So it's good news, everybody. And with that, we're going to return back to our pre-planned agenda. Mr. Falsey, take it away.
Yeah, I don't know if Mr. Bockenstead has anything he wants to add on communications with the congressional delegation, but I know that we've been in pretty regular communication with them about port dealings. I'll pause to see if he is available and wants to say anything.
I don't have anything real to add other than that we are, in communication with them and have provided them these updates, and I will actually I will send them this order as well, just to keep them in the loop.
Great. And then the second item of the 4 that I mentioned is just an update on how the petroleum cement terminal is going. So folks are aware that piles are being driven now. I thought I'd give it to Sharon Walsh for just a moment to let us know how 2020 is going and what the plan for 2021 is looking like.
Before you do that, I can tell you piles are not being driven right now because when they're being driven, my house shakes.
Okay. Thanks, Bill, and hello, everybody. I'm glad everybody is well and hope you stay that way. The phase 1 construction is progressing pretty well. The field activities going on is trestle piling installations going well. We have 8 of 26 permanent trestle piling, and the trestle is the part of the new wharf that goes out into the water. Then the platform is like the hammerhead of that, where the bells and whistles get put on next year. So we have we're about 31% done with the trestle piling. We have the Storkron, which is the large barge, is on the water. It's going to arrive on Saturday. They'll be setting anchors and doing other preparations for the platform pile driving, which is scheduled to begin in early June, about a week later. Want to point out on our website, there is a construction webcam that's available to the public to look at. It has a time-lapse feature, which is kind of interesting. Right now, the trestle piling is kind of hidden behind some south-loading dock piling, but you should be able to follow the progress there. Oh, thank you. So check the Port of Alaska website for that construction cam, and thanks to Jim Jager for getting that all set up and organized. That's what's going on. Any questions?
One of the things I'll mention before Sharon pivots to 2021 is that the construction of the petroleum cement terminal's first phase is also of interest to us because so much of the future costs depend on what the rate of productivity is. So we'll be watching like a hawk to see how many piles you can actually drive during a day, and that will radically improve our ability to forecast future costs. That was a big part of what broke down between the earlier arrangement with the construction manager at risk, is that we were estimating one level of pile production productivity. They were estimating a much lower level of pile production activity. So we'll see. Now the proof will be in the pudding. We'll have real world test results.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so if we have finished with the petroleum cement terminal, the 2 other items to talk about are the plan of finance and the steering committee ordinance. I will pivot here to first talking about the plan of finance. Just a second while I'm playing Vanna White means I'm a little slower on the draw. I got to pull up my notes here. Here we go. Okay, so as we have mentioned in earlier work sessions, a lot of us sort of caught the petroleum cement terminal midstream, and were a lot of lessons that we came out of that. But one of them that was very apparent to me was that it is in everyone's interest as we proceed through what comes next to be extremely cost aware. And in my mind, that means always calculating down to the real world final answer. Here are the kinds of tariffs that we might have to impose in order to pay for what we are now designing, to have that number on paper somewhere and available for everyone to see. So I asked the finance folks to say, please prepare for me a draft comprehensive plan of finance that would explain how we get all the way through the entire rest of the modernization program, and we are finished with it all, and everything has been paid for. Where does that money come from? What does it ultimately mean to tariffs? Which ultimately means, what does it ultimately mean for all of us when we're going to the stores and buying buying goods on the shelf? So I circulated a first draft of that, along with a cover email to hopefully all of the affected port users from the port user group. I stole Val Dreyfus's email list, so if I've missed anybody, of course, feel free to forward it around, to the port commissioners, to our port folks, and to all of the assembly members who are serving, all of whom are on this committee of the whole. And I'll just step through my cover note for those who weren't on that email distribution. I guess it was 1 a.m. this morning. So first, the comprehensive plan of finance is designed to show from the beginning that we are not in a mindset of, well, let's design whatever we'd like and figure out how to pay for it later. That we are always going to be operating with the, okay, but what does this really mean to tariffs at the end of the day? Second, this draft does have a number of significant assumptions, and the two chief assumptions that are probably worth flagging are first, that we're assuming that the cost to fix the northern extension, which is the unstable land that's left over from the failed federal project that we are still fighting about with MARAD, that all of that will be paid for by the recovery in the lawsuit. Of course, that is not a certain thing yet. We don't have any of that money, but that's how we have proposed to pay for it in this plan. It could be that we get more money from that lawsuit and we are able to push some to the other parts of the project. It could be that we get not enough money to fix that problem, in which case we'll be looking for some other solution. Second, there was a lot of discussion before this legislative session about potentially having a statewide general obligation bond for infrastructure development. That didn't come to pass in this first session, but some of the discussion was that were such a bond to be pushed to voters, that the state's contribution to the Port of Alaska would be in the vein of $200 million. We built that assumption into this plan to show what it would actually look like. The assumption of state monies is salutary and helpful for a whole variety of reasons, but one is that it can help to get us out of some tricky design questions when it comes to building things that are of common use across the whole of the port. So meaning, in particular, we have costs like right now, the port administrative building is sitting on Terminal 1. The port administration building needs to be moved. It's going to cost something. Who pays for that? Well, it's an overall port project. I mean, it benefits every user of the port. So if left to no other choice but to collect, to pay for it through revenues generated by the port itself, then we'll have to have tricky discussions about, does it come from the cargo users in the main? Does it come from the petroleum and cement users? And what proportion do those two users have to contribute? The state money eliminates all that because we can pay for all the common costs before we have to have those kind of difficult questions about how much of this is coming from the petroleum side, how much of this is coming from the cargo side. But of course, it also offsets the ultimate end user cost. Any amount of money that we receive from the state or from the federal government will reduce the need to do tariff increases. So we've rolled that assumption into the draft that we presented. And you can also kind of see what happens if you back that out, because there's a chart on page, it's going to be tricky while I'm talking. Let's see here, page 6, that does show what the sort of, you can estimate it because it's showing on the chart what $200 million looks like if it were debt service, and that's on the order of a surcharge of something like $8 per ton on the cargo side. So it would be an easy enough exercise to pull that assumption out if we wanted to proceed in that direction, but that's sort of our working understanding, and it seems plausible going forward. The draft also includes a number of significant exclusions, and among them that I highlighted for folks yesterday or early this morning was first that we didn't build into this plan an assumed receipt of any particular amount of additional federal grant monies. And the reason for that is because we just aren't really sure how to credibly project what additional amount of federal grants we are likely to receive. Of course, we are going to continue to chase all of the federal grants that we are able to chase, and are certainly hopeful that we receive more than $0 of federal funds. To the extent that there were a state general obligation bond payment of less than $200 million, the federal money could get us closer to that $200 million goal. To the extent that we get a lot of federal funds, that will just have an offsetting effect on tariffs, and we should be able to have a rough sense of what that is, dollar for dollar or $1 million for dollar. But at this point, we put it in without assuming that we're going to get money from Uncle Sam. The second is the petroleum cement terminal value engineering cost reduction group process really surfaced a consensus that maybe we can avoid all of the costs of building a second petroleum-only dock by integrating fuel facilities into some part of the newly designed cargo solution. And hopefully, reasonably, that should be a cheaper, better alternative to what was carried forward from the 2014 design charrette. But we don't yet have in this plan any assumed cost for what the additional petroleum facilities, what they would actually cost, and so therefore don't have an additional tariff increment to disclose on the fuel side, because we just haven't designed that, so we don't have any credible cost information on that front. But rather than hold up the whole of the story, because we're doing cost causer, cost payer, whatever those additional fuel facilities cost would ultimately be borne either through grants or through additional tariff adjustments, and so they wouldn't on just the fuel side, and so they wouldn't affect the cargo story, which is what we were trying to drive towards more rapidly now. Last two things. You'll see as you step through this draft that we've also very much embraced the cost causer, cost payer design choice. And that has meant that we don't have private terminals now, but we do have one terminal which in the plan, which is a roll-on, roll-off facility, and one terminal that is a lift-on, lift-off facility. And in practice, while that's not a Matson terminal and a tote terminal, because there are other users as well, Matson is using one, tote is using the other. And our proposal here is the cost of rebuilding those terminals doesn't get socialized across the whole of the cargo facility, but is particularized to the different terminals. And we think the reason that we propose that is we think that best aligns the incentives, because now every person who's helping to inform the design will understand that the costs of the design are ultimately and in the main going to be passed through to their customers through a tariff change. So there is a strong incentive for everyone to say, let's build only what we really need or what makes economic sense so that everybody remains maximally competitive. We are certainly aware, though, that causes a differential. And in this draft, you'll see that the punchline is that the estimated surcharge tariff per ton is pretty different between the current facilities. The Matson Tide would be nearly $42 per ton. The tote side would be $16.50 per ton. But the last line I'm going to mention before we open it up for discussion is that it is also very much a moving target, because we have all said that as we are now pivoting away from the petroleum cement terminal to what comes next, that we are all looking for cost reductions, that we are all taking a fresh look at the designs that were carried forward from the 2014 era. And I'm hopeful that some of those costs that we're assuming here may be further reduced as we step into those conversations. We were really beginning that effort until we were slightly delayed by the COVID pandemic, but they're underway. And I think we're just now starting to get into fuller conversations with what Matson is thinking, and conversations with Tote about what Tote is thinking. Everybody's sharpening their pencils. They've brought engineers to the table, and as the engineers complete their work, the numbers that we're assuming for construction costs are certainly going to change. But the promise is that as they materially change, we will also refresh all these numbers so that, again, we always have at the end of the day, how would we really pay for this, and what would it really look like? My sense is that this is very much a conversation starter and not necessarily close to what is ultimately going to happen. None of this is set in stone. But we wanted to do what we said that we would do, which is to be as transparent as we know how to be, keep all our cards on the table, face up, and invite others to improve this. So if there are things that are helpful for us to think about, or that we could calculate, we are certainly willing to do that. I'm going to use phone a friend for questions on this, largely to Alex Slifka, who with Ross Roosevelt developed most of the text, and then Jeff Boole and Sharon Walsh if there are questions about some of the cost assumptions. But otherwise, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Bill. We have Mr. Weddleton in the queue. John, you're recognized.
All right, thanks. Just, Bill, briefly curious on the difference between Tote and Matson. It's huge. And so what are the key elements that create the much higher costs for Matson? And then are there like efficiencies? They use the cranes, so do they get containers off 5 times as fast as Tote or something like that? Or can you, I know that's a pretty broad question, but maybe just a few key points.
Yeah, and I'll have Jeff Poole backfill me on this, but in the main, the terminals that we have carried forward since 2014 on the Matson side is a really big deck, and on the tote side is a much smaller deck. And so the facility just costs different things. Now, I think you're driving at what I hope is being surfaced here, which is if that deck is worth it because the operational efficiency of the business means that all of their other costs are reduced, then they sort of remain competitive, then let's do it. But if looking at that, they go, oh, Lord, this kind of charge is going to take us out of the game, then hopefully we can look at the design we have on the table and go, oh, well, maybe we really didn't need all that deck space. Maybe there's a cheaper solution. Jeff, do you want to give us a sort of a first order sense of what's driving the main cost difference? If Jeff is here, or maybe Sharon.
I mean, there's one that you missed, Bill, and that's the cranes and the fact that you have these giant structures. So, but let the experts talk.
Hey,
you, Bill.
sorry, Jeff is on.
Oh, I got unmuted. I figured that out. Just to follow up what you're saying, yeah, the size of the structure to support a lift-on, lift-off operation is much larger than what is required for the roll-on, roll-off. So it's just the square feet of trestles, the square feet of wharf deck. One thing that we have been in discussions with Matson about is their initial concept of 100-foot wide cranes, which provides 5 lanes of traffic underneath a crane to improve operational efficiency versus the cost of that added width. We currently have 3 lanes of traffic underneath smaller cranes, and so weighing the economics versus the improved efficiency and trying to find ways to reduce the just the simple square footage of the structures themselves. Our conversations with Tote's been doing a lot of homework with their engineering resources and has significantly reduced the size of their overall infrastructure requirements, and that has resulted in a pretty significant reduction in cost right now between Matson and Tote. Sharon, would you like to add anything more?
No, that's really helpful for me.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add, Tote has done some significant reductions. It is important to note, though, that is that might result in a design that's only usable for a vessel that Tote owns. And so it would not be what you could consider an all-purpose wharf that could be used for other vessels showing up unless they had the same configuration as the Tote vessel.
So Sharon, if I might, then this raises the kind of thing that Bill was talking about before, that there are just some costs that are general costs to the government that we're requiring onto the project or the system as opposed to the users. So are there other user configurations then that we should be considering for that dock that we might have to pay for or figure out a way to have funded?
That's certainly all on the table. We're just simply not far enough along in our actual discussions with, we haven't seen Tote's actual design yet or anything like that to really put, good concrete numbers to those other options yet, but it's certainly on the table.
All right. So, and just for the record, Alex is listening in, Mr. Huffling from Tote. If he wants to speak, he can let me know. And Pete, you're in the queue. Please be recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering, is it possible to have the petroleum and cement deliveries on different days than when Tote and Matson are in there? Or is that something that is not reasonably possible? Thank you.
The answer to that is, Mr. Chair, this is Bill Falsey. The answer to that is yes. And part of the reason that everyone in the petroleum cement terminal value engineering process was thinking about merging fuel facilities onto a cargo terminal is precisely because of that the fuel deliveries could just be scheduled around the cargo users. It was harder with cement because cement often is on the dock for just a very, very long time. They have to pull on and pull off. But once the petroleum cement terminal exists, they're only at the petroleum cement terminals. They're not anywhere else in the facility. So yeah, the short answer is yes, we certainly could share the dock space.
All right, thank you. And just also for the record, the piles are now being driven. Bill, next, if there are no other questions, then I guess we'll move on. I did have one question that came to me that maybe before we move on, you could answer, and I think you kind of answered it. In the documents that you submitted out for the basis of cost estimates, were those were all adjusted after the data from the PCT bidding, right? So the records that we have now are kind of post PCT.
Yes, and maybe I'll ask Jeff to give a little bit of color about how we adjusted the numbers that were in the previous estimates to be the basis of the cost estimate in the current draft.
Thank you.
Jeff may have to find his way off of mute again.
This is a dynamic we're all not stranger to anymore.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Thank you. Sorry about that. The cost estimate in this plan of finance is slightly lower than our previous estimates that totaled $1.93 billion. We looked at the PCT bids, which came in about 20% below our estimates. We took the Terminal 1 estimate and we discounted it by 10%, assuming that maybe we'll capture some of that savings in the future on future bids, but we discounted the Terminal 1 number by 10%, and then we did the same thing for Terminal 2. We discounted it 10%, and then furthermore, what TOTE's current concept, what their minimum requirements are, is about 2/3 of the structure footprint of what we had before. So we further reduced that by another 30%. So we've tried to, at a very high level, approximate where we think we're headed, but without a refined concept, we don't have a bottoms-up cost estimate. But we have taken into account the fact that our estimate previously may have been unnecessarily high.
And hopefully we have structured this in a way now where the incentives are all pointing in the same direction. Now it is in everybody's interest to make this as affordable a facility as it can be, because everybody understands where the bottom line is going to be. And also, everyone will understand that to the extent that we can get assistance in being successful in chasing state or federal grant opportunities, all of the figures go down. And when they go down, the differentials are also going to go down to the extent there remains a differential after additional discussions with Matson and TOTE. So, like I say, this is very much just the beginning of the conversation. This is almost certainly not going to be exactly what really happens, but it is part of our commitment to reveal our thinking and our best understanding in real time, or as close to real time as we can. And we're happy to continue the conversation as we go forward.
All right, part 3.
Okay, that was, I think, the conclusion, the exciting conclusion of part 3. Part 4, I don't have as much to talk about, but back in January, we had presented a draft ordinance which would instantiate a support modernization steering committee. Part of that was further experience from the petroleum cement terminal, where we brought kind of the final 100% design, and then we all looked at it and said, is there any changes that we want to make? We wanted to have a process that could survive an administration change, that would ensure that we had constant communication as the design was being advanced, and that there was a forum for regularly dispersing that information and resolving disagreements about what kind of designs we should really be advancing. We, as an administration, don't necessarily even have strong views about how that steering committee is instantiated in terms of its membership or particular voting rules and whatnot. But we floated a draft again just to get the conversation started. The user group has been chewing on that draft, and yesterday, 2 days ago, sent around a couple of responses. So it's probably best to ask Val Dreyfus or Alex Hoffling about where they're coming from. But there was a version 1 and a version 2, which in the main had reduced down the number of people who would serve on that steering committee, which is fine. The original draft that we had floated, I think, was just probably bigger than it needed to be. It had sort of less prescriptive rules about what the committee needs to be doing, which is probably also fine. And then there were sort of dueling views on what should constitute a quorum, some dueling views on timelines. Ultimately, I know that that's not going to be a decision that we even make, that the legislative branch in the assembly is going to choose what that's going to look like. And so I think my purpose here is just to say you have all the pieces now. So you had a first pitch from the administration, you have 2 versions from petroleum, from the port user group, and the assembly is ultimately going to decide what they want to put together.
All right, Val or Alex, do you wish to comment? Dylan?
Yeah, good afternoon, or actually still morning. Good morning, everyone. So this is Val Dreyfus. So yeah, so I think our responses basically provided a form for an advisory committee to deal with dispute resolutions that surface. It created a panel of 5 people represented by Matson, Tote, a representative from Petroleum Cement, nominated by the Port Users Group, the port director, and the muni manager. And I think the other concept that was put forth is this does not change any of the responsibilities or authorities of the current entities, be it the assembly, the mayor's office, the municipality, or the port. It simply provided a public forum by which disputes could be addressed and aired. And then they vote, and when they vote, that too just represents how people voted on whatever issue was put forth. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Val. Alex? And I don't know how you unmute. I think it's *6, but.
I think I figured it out. So yeah, this is Alex with Val. That's a great representation of the work that we did, and you know, we're pleased with being able to be involved in coming up with, you know, the versions, and look forward to the response and participating in the advisory committee.
All right.
You know, I think one other thing. So for us, from a tote perspective, we prefer version 2, and it's really just made up in the in participation of the port director and what constitutes a quorum and voting. So those are the main differences, but in the whole, they're very, very similar.
Thank you. And I imagine the assembly of this committee and some work sessions will convene on the topic of how to frame this up and land it and create it so that it starts to function sooner than later. I would imagine by end of June, we'll have this conversation done, hopefully. So, okay. Other items, Mr. Falsey?
Actually, Mr. Chair, this is Miss Alatel. I asked to get the queue about this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I think you may have just touched on my question, but that was kind of where I wanted to hear is it the administration's perspective now to kind of leave us as a committee and the body with the 3 options and have us move this forward, because a lot of times it's the administration that ultimately has been bringing items forward and asking us to then respond to kind of fully drafted documents.
I guess the best way to answer that to the vice chair through the chair is, sorry if I'm interrupting, Mr. Chair, is just we made an opening pitch. We were never strongly wedded to any of those. I think the two drafts that you received from the port user group are pretty close to the opening draft in the main. Frankly, I haven't spent a lot of quality time with the drafts yet. I just made a quick red line compare and circulated it to folks so I could sort of see the differences. So I don't know that there are any hills that I feel like they were going to have to die on, but it feels like we're in the ballpark where everyone's sort of circling around the same kind of idea. And I don't know that we have strong feelings about whether the port director must be present in order for there to be a quorum of the steering committee. I don't know if we have strong feelings, and ultimately you would get to pick anyway. So,
Right, Bill, I would just add that from where I stand, having reviewed all three versions, I think it is now just a series of policy calls that need to be made. And these are simple policy calls, have structures and organization, because the framework appears to be generally agreed upon by all the parties. And so with that in mind, Meg, I would suggest that it is in our hands to kind of sort out the final details and run it. So we have a draft ordinance already prepared in the preliminary documents. And so I think we're close. And Mr. Weddleton put a question in, which is version 2 Alex referred to. And if you look at the document that was shared that has the, what is it called? It's the port last users group letter dated May 20th, 2020. If you read in it, it has both versions kind of simultaneous or consecutive to each other in the document, so you can review it. And we'll make sure this gets out to people. And this will be the basis of our conversation going forward with the draft ordinance that Mr. Falls had previously submitted.
and I'm just putting on the screen, I tried to create a quick and dirty Microsoft compare version between version 1 that came from the port user group and version 2. And I think it's just these very minor blue changes. It looks like there was a language change about what the purpose of the modernization project is and whether it is a necessary project or a necessary reconstruction project. There was one change where one time we referred to Muni Code as the Muni Open Meetings Act, and one time we didn't. But substantive changes were, is a quorum a majority of the members of the committee, or is it the port director and 3 additional members of the committee? And then that changes how you vote. And then last, I will confess, I haven't really wrapped my mind around this change, but one of them had a timeline that was not more than 60 days, and one of them had a timeline that was not less than 60 days. But if the port users have any illuminating comments on that, I'm all good. Sorry, it's hard to read. I'll make this bigger.
This is Val.
Go ahead, Val.
Yes, I'll comment on that. So the language in 4A that Bill's got up on the screen is the exact language that was in Bill's ordinance proposal. When we looked at it from the majority of the port users group, we felt that it should have said not more than 60 days. So that would require a decision to be made within a certain time period. And that's why we felt that that was a better wording to make sure that there was a response in a time frame required in the ordinance. In version 2, if it says not less than 90 days, which is what's shown here, then that means that you don't have to give an answer. You can't give an answer in less than 60 days. And it also means you never have to give an answer. And that's how we thought it should be, not more than 60 days.
Thank you. And for my part, there's one change that's not on the document that I want to discuss with the body, and that is the draft as it stands says that the user, this body would be advisory to the mayor, and I believe it should be advisory to the mayor and the assembly. And that's a small thing maybe, and it could be something larger depending on how the administration looks at it. But these are the conversations we'll have in a process coming up in the near future. Meg, I hope that answered your question. If not, please follow up.
No, I think that's helpful. I'm wondering, if it makes sense to discuss, and we can do this offline, a work group to kind of get it into a certain shape and then bring it back before the committee. We can continue that discussion. Thank you.
I would offer that work group, I believe, is you and me, and if another interested party wants to join us, that's fine. So, or any member of the administration, but I think we can tackle this. So getting it ready for at least close to prime time. Any other questions? Mr. Falsey, anything to add?
Nope, that was the presentation we wanted to make today.
Okay, so now we will turn to the audience participation process. Does anyone in the audience wish to be recognized?
Yes,
Mr. Haberman, you have 3 minutes.
thank you very much and wish you the best. Let me start the clock. My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I represent myself. I live in the Metro Valley, follow the public process. And the public process is an appropriate decision made by the governing body is more likely the public interest. First note, and I am on topic when I address these issues. Note, the Port Commission meeting happened a few days ago for Anchorage. I attended it remotely. But the conversation resulted in the presentations where the materials there were not available for the public and we were blinded. I addressed the concern and note my email address is eugene@mtaonline.net. eugene@mtaonline.net. And the end result is that information that never got forwarded to me. Next, this meeting, I listened to the details that were said to you all. Note, yes, you do have a website, a section that says the Enterprise Committee. Yes, there is an agenda, and I'm able to open it up. It's hidden away, but I was able to open it up. But underneath that, on that website for the Muni, it says the title is Plan of Finance, Port All Phases, May 14th, 2020, first draft for discussion. And another item, PAMP, source of funds. When clicking on those items, I saw a box jumped up and said authorization required. So those items and what you presented today, the public is blind to. Maybe you have it, but the public does not have that information. And efforts going to the website, clicking on says authorization required. I can click on the agenda, but I can't click on that other. So again, this is really serious because you're dealing with the port, you're dealing with finances, and I'm hearing about these other committee meetings or whatever, and where were those notices and user groups, and the failure of the public to be connected. And the discussion today, I want to stress this other point. There was a lot of things said at the Port Commission meeting, dealing with the finances, dealing with money coming in and revenue. Those papers were available to them, but not to the public, and we still haven't gotten it. It's interesting to note the finances and what revenues coming in was not addressed at this meeting. And I thought that something like that, as serious as that, and looking at what is going on with the port and what money is coming in, would have been addressed at this meeting and at the assembly. Thank you very much. With 35 seconds to spare.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman. Anyone else wish to be heard? Members of the public? All right, hearing none, we're going to close that portion.
Chris, you're on mute.
I hit the wrong button. All right, so that concludes our, thank you, Mr. Haberman, and that concludes our new business section. And now we're going into item 4 on the agenda. First part is legislative priorities. Is there anything that members of the committee would like to add to that slate at this time? Okay, hearing none, we're going to move to part B of that question. It's budget items. And I won't necessarily say for 2021, but
actually, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Apologies. This is Felix Rivera. Thank you. So actually, I wanted to follow up and get an update on a resolution that you, me, Ms. LaFrance, and Mr. Peterson worked on that went to the state regarding the issuance of a general obligation bond. And just wanted to get sort of the administration's perspective on how that conversation has been going with the legislature.
Mr. Falsey.
I'm sorry, I was multitasking and missed the first part of that question, but the question was about conversations with the legislature?
On the GO bond, we sent a resolution requesting a general obligation bond. And so is there any progress? Do you have any thoughts?
I will invite some comments from Jason Bockenstedt, although I can tell you that the legislature just gavelled out and did not pass a general obligation bond. But they may not be done for the year, so Jason, take it away.
Sure, and I don't have much to add other than what Bill already said. I think that there was some hope that they would have considered it, but as everyone realizes, they recessed fairly early after everything started happening with the coronavirus, and only came back this week to finish out or approve the CARES Act funding that is going to go to local governments.
Jason, I would just add to that after the session, the original part of the session, I was down there. It was communicated quite clearly to me that there is a very well-placed high person in the leadership of both the Senate and the House who have no interest in forwarding a general obligation bond on the port until such a time as the plan of finance is clear. And so actually this meeting with the documents sent to us very late last night, some of us actually read them very late last night, get us a very substantial step closer toward answering that question. When the legislature sees the users operating and coordinating with the Muni and all of us kind of singing from the same sheet of music, I've been told that's when they're more likely to take up the question of a geo bond. But going into this session, there was still too much question for them to comfortably step into the void. And so that was communicated to me in relationship to the resolution that you are referring to.
Thank you.
Any other items on that legislative priority section?
Mr. Chairman, this is Pete.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
When I was in Juneau for the AML convention in February, I spoke to a couple of legislators, and they're a little worried about the state's bond rating if they borrowed any additional funds. We know they have a very challenging fiscal situation right now, and so borrowing more might be difficult. It might be very difficult for them to pay that back, and so that was the feedback that I was getting at the time. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to step back to previous items, comment made from the public, Mr. Haberman, it's been reported to me that if you go to portofalaska.com, the financial documents are posted there. It should be available to the public. So moving down to budget items on the agenda, I have been are there any members of the body that would like to add anything to that topic first? No? Okay. So I have been in informal discussions again with the administration and some with the port, but in particular with the finance office about kind of circling back to a consultant that the assembly may hire to help us navigate this process and have a person or a team inside of the process more thoughtfully. And so there's still a conversation happening about appropriating a small amount like we did the first time to hire a contractor to serve as assembly, not counsel in a legal sense, but in the sense of this port process. Okay, and on behalf of Dean Gates, our counsel, he asked me to specifically read out the comment from the port staff, Jim Jager, that the Port Commission late-breaking Port Commission financial report was posted on www.portofalaska.com immediately after it was introduced at the Port Commission meeting. So there you go, Dean. With that, we are to the final comments at the committee meeting today. Does anyone else have anything for the good of the order? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
See you all later.